In this video, we are going to talk about the structure and genres of the Book of Psalms. We will begin by talking about what the Book of Psalms is, then discussing the structure of Psalms. We will look at some of the genres found in Psalms according to Hermann Gunkel, and look at examples of these, and conclude by talking about the authorship of the Book of Psalms. When we talk about the Book of Psalms, we often think of 150 psalms, or perhaps poems, that are compiled into one book. In the ancient world, these were more like musical compositions that would be sung as praises to God. This illuminated manuscript, which is from the medieval period, can show you the musical ledger that would have gone along with the songs. The title of the Book of Psalms is the Tehillim in Hebrew, which means praises. The title Psalms that we get actually comes from the Greek psalmoi, which means something like instrumental music, or perhaps the words that go along with this instrumental music. What's most important to understand when we talk about the Book of Psalms is that it's an anthology. As Richard Clifford says, it's an anthology of anthologies. Not only is the Book of Psalms not one work by one author, but it's composed of several parts that are also composed of more pieces within them. We'll look at the structure in a little bit more detail in a moment. The Book of Psalms is broken into 5 different parts. You can see here the psalms that go along with each book that's within the Book of Psalms. This breakdown does not necessarily reflect anything about dating, context, genre, etc., though it may reflect some of the ideas of authorship behind the Psalms. When you pick up a copy of the Psalms today, whether it is a Gideon Bible that you're handed on the street, or a Bible from a Protestant or Catholic bookstore, you'll probably find that there are 150 Psalms in a certain order. What is interesting looking at ancient collections of the Psalms is that our idea of this set structure of the Psalms from 1 through 150 was not always the case. In the Septuagint and in Eastern Orthodox churches, there is a 151st Psalm, and in other places there are 152nd, 153rd, and 154th Psalms. This 151st Psalm is found in the Dead Sea Scrolls in what we call the Great Psalm Scroll, or 11Q5. 11Q5 is particularly interesting to look at because it does not have the Psalms in the order that we might expect. The Great Psalm Scroll was probably compiled around 30 to 50 CE, which is about 200 to 250 years after we have a complete set psalm from 1 to 150. What we see instead is the psalms ordered in a various order, beginning with Psalm 101, 102, 103, then with a break in the text, jumping to 109 and probably 110. Again, another break in the text, jumping to 118, then to 104, then to 147, to 105, and so on. Later in the text, it also includes part of Sirach 51, as well as an apostrophe to Zion. What we can see here is that the Psalms were not necessarily used as a set book, but rather as a liturgical device for worship. In the late 19th and early 20th century, Hermann Gunkel, who was a German biblical scholar, developed the idea of form criticism. When looking at the Book of Psalms, he recognized that there were various genres within it. This breakup, like we talked about earlier, did not necessarily follow a Book 1, Book 2, Book 3, and so on sequence, but rather these different psalms were broken up throughout the book. He argued that the best way to understand the historical context of the Book of Psalms was to break down the genres and recompile the specific genres together to look at what the intention of the writer might be for those genres and be able to discover more about the Israelite context. While many scholars dismiss this theory today, it can be a helpful way of thinking about what genres we see in the Book of Psalms. One of the most simple types of genres we see are hymns. Hymns are simply praises. For example, in Psalm 100, it says, "Make a joyful noise to the Lord, all the earth. Worship the Lord with gladness, come into his presence with singing," and so on. What we see here is an idea that God should be praised, rather than asking the audience to do something or asking God to do something. Another genre that he came up with is a petition or complaint. These might be petitions or complaints on behalf of the community or on behalf of an individual. For example, Psalm 44 says to God, "Yet you have rejected us and abased us, and have not gone out with our armies. You made us turn back from the foe, and our enemies have gotten spoil. You have made us like sheep for slaughter, and have scattered us among the nations. You have sold your people for a trifle, demanding no high price for them." This psalm is a complaint or even a lament over the state of the Israelites and how God has not taken care of them. A third genre that we see is the thanksgiving genre. These can often be similar to hymns, but typically express more thanks, like in this Psalm 138, which says, "I give you thanks, O Lord, with my whole heart. Before the gods I sing your praise. I bow down toward your holy temple and give thanks to your name for your steadfast love and your faithfulness." One of the most peculiar genres that we see in the Book of Psalms are the royal psalms. The royal psalms are typically written by an author who reflects a royal point of view. They often express a concern for the community and what a ruler might look out on and be concerned in his or her rulership. For example, Psalm 110 says, "The Lord says to my Lord, sit at my right hand until I make your enemies your footstool. The Lord sends out from Zion your mighty scepter, rule in the midst of your foes. Your people will offer themselves willingly on the day you lead your forces on the holy mountains. From the womb of the morning, like dew, your youth will come to you." As you can see in this psalm, there's a concern for Zion, or Jerusalem, and a mighty scepter, which would be a mark of a ruler. There's this idea of the midst of your foes, which would refer to other nations warring against Israel, as well as your people, or the people collective under the king. Finally, we have wisdom psalms. Wisdom psalms are very similar to poetic interpretations of Proverbs. They simply offer some kind of wisdom or guidance on how to live. For example, Psalm 1 says, "Happy are those who do not follow the advice of the wicked, or take the path that sinners tread, or sit in the seat of scoffers. But their delight is in the law of the Lord, and on his law they meditate day and night," and so on. What we see here, in looking at the genres of the Psalms, is that the Israelites had different concerns when they wrote songs about God. Some of these were in the form of hymn or thanksgiving, simply praising God or thanking God for something that he had done, while others expressed wisdom and guidance for the community. When we talk about the Book of Psalms, perhaps one of the most misunderstood things is the authorship. Traditionally, the authorship of most of the Psalms is to David. King David, who is the second king of the United Monarchy of Israel, was mentioned playing the harp throughout the Book of Samuel. In addition, many superscriptions in the Psalms attribute the authorship to David. However, most modern biblical scholars reject this notion that David wrote most, if any, of the Psalms that are attributed to him. While David may have had a hand in perhaps the composition of some of the Psalms, he more than likely did not write them down, but perhaps had somebody scribe them for him. We also have many Psalms attributed to the Korahites, who are a Levitical family. The Koraites were also temple singers and would have been involved in composing music for the court. One of the prominent figures we see is Asaph. Asaph may have been a Koraite in terms of family, as a specific person, but also may have been a label for someone who would have been a musician for the king. Now that we have reached the end of this video, you should be able to explain the structure of the Book of Psalms, identify and apply the genres of the Book of Psalms, and discuss the authorship of the Book of Psalms.